This is Public Knowledge Radio. I'm Jake, and I'll be your host through a constant stream of lectures, reports, audiobooks, and other thought-provoking audio, broadcasting 24/7, no ads, no politics, just knowledge made public. Welcome to the Science Block on Public Knowledge Radio. Today's lineup is outer space, inner design, and the search for truth. First, astronomer Mike Brown, known to some as the man who killed Pluto. Here's his 2019 TED Talk, The Search for the Ninth Planet. All of the following is used under permissions of Creative Commons from TED and TEDx. That was Mike Brown charting the outer edges of our solar neighborhood. Now we orbit closer to everyday innovation. This is Yves Bahar in his 2008 TED Talk, Designing Objects That Tell Stories.
Being a child and sort of crawling around the house, I remember these Turkish carpets, and there were these scenes, these battle scenes, these love scenes. I mean, look, this animal is trying to fight back the spear from this soldier, and this. My mom took these pictures actually last week of our carpets, and I remember this to this day. There was another object, this sort of towering piece of furniture with creatures and gargoyles and nudity and pretty scary stuff when you're a little kid. What I remember today from this is that objects tell stories. So storytelling has been a really strong influence in my work. And then there was another influence. I was a teenager, and at 15, 16, I guess like all teenagers, we want to just do what we love and what we believe in. So I took the two things, I fused together the two things I loved the most, which was skiing and windsurfing. Those are pretty good escapes from the drab weather in Switzerland. So I created this compilation of the two. I took my skis and I took a board and I put a mast foot in there and some foot straps and some metal fins. And here I was sort of going really fast on frozen lakes. It was really a death trap. I mean, it was incredible. It worked incredibly well, but it was really dangerous. And I realized then I had to go to design school. I mean, look at those graphics there. So I went to design school, and it was the early 90s when I finished, and I saw something extraordinary happening in Silicon Valley. So I wanted to be there. I saw that the computer was sort of coming into our homes, that it had to change in order to sort of be with us in our homes. And so I got myself a job, and I was working for a consultancy, and we would get into these meetings, and these managers would come in. And they would say, well, what we're going to do here is really important, and they would give the projects code names, mostly from Star Wars, actually. Things like C-3PO, Yoda, Luke. So, in anticipation, I would be this young designer in the back of the room, and I would sort of raise my hand, and I would ask questions. I mean, in retrospect, probably stupid questions, but things like, what's this cap lock key for, or this num lock key for? That thing. Do people really use it? Do they need it? Do they want it in their homes? What I realized then is they didn't really want to change sort of the legacy stuff. They didn't want to change the insides. They were really looking for us, the designers, to create the skins, to sort of put the outside, to create, to put some pretty stuff outside of the box. And I didn't want to be a colorist. It wasn't what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a stylist in this way. And then I saw this quote: "Advertising is a price companies pay for being unoriginal." So I had to start on my own. So I moved to San Francisco, and I started a little company, Fuse Project. And what I wanted to work on is important stuff. And I wanted to really sort of not just work on the skins, but I wanted to work on the entire human experience. So the first projects were sort of humble, but they took technology and maybe made it into things that people would use in a new way, maybe finding some new functionality. This is a watch we made for Mini Cooper, the car company, right when it launched. And it's the first watch that has a display that switches from horizontal to vertical. And that allows me to sort of check my time really discreetly here without bending my elbow. And other projects which were really about transformation, about sort of matching sort of the human need. This is a little piece of furniture for an Italian manufacturer, and it ships completely flat, and then it folds into a coffee table and a stool and whatnot. And something a little bit more experimental. This is a light fixture for Swarovski, and what it does is it changes shapes. It goes from a circle to a round to a square to a figure eight. And just by drawing on a little computer tablet, the entire light fixture sort of adjusts to what shape you want. And then finally, the leaf lamp for Herman Miller. This is a pretty involved process. It took us about 4.5 years, but I really was looking for creating a unique experience of light, a new experience of light. So we had to design both the light and the light bulb. And that's a unique opportunity, I would say, in design. And the new experience I was looking for is giving the choice for the user to go from a warm, sort of glowing kind of mood light all the way to a bright work light. So the light bulb actually does that. It allows the person to switch and to mix, these two colorations. And it's done in a very sort of simple way. One just touches the base of the light, and on one side you can mix the brightness, and on the other, the sort of coloration of the light. So all of these projects have sort of a humanistic sense to them. And I think as designers, we need to really think about how we can create a different relationship between our work and the world. Whether it's for business or as I'm going to show on some sort of civic type projects. Because I think everybody agrees that as designers, we bring value. Value to business, value to the users also. But I think it's the values that we put into these projects that ultimately create the greater value. And the values we bring can be, about environmental issues, about sustainability, about low power consumption. They can be about function and beauty. They can be about business strategy. But design is really the glue that brings these things together. Jawbone is a project that you're familiar with, and it has a humanistic technology. It feels your skin. It rests on your skin, and it knows when it is you're talking. And by knowing when it is you're talking, it gets rid of the other noises that it knows about, which is the sort of environmental noises. But the other thing that's humanistic about Jawbone is that we really decided to sort of take out all the techie stuff and all the nerdy stuff out of it and try to make it as beautiful as we can. I mean, think about it. The care we take in selecting sunglasses or jewelry or our accessories is really important. So if it isn't beautiful, it really doesn't belong on your face. And this is what we're pursuing here. But how we work on Jawbone is really unique. I want to point at something here on the left. This is the board. This is one of the things that goes inside that makes this technology work. But this is the design process. There's somebody changing the board, putting traces on the board, changing the location of the ICs as the designers on the other side are doing the work. So it's not about slapping skins anymore on a technology. It's really about designing from the inside out. And then on the other side of the room, the designers are making small adjustments, sketching, drawing by hand, putting it on the computer, and it's what I call being design driven. There's some push and pull, but design is really helping define the whole experience from the inside out. And then, of course, design is never done. And this is the other new way, the other way that is unique in how we work is because it's never done, you have to do all this other stuff, the packaging and the website, and you need to sort of continue to really touch the user in many ways. And but how do you retain somebody when it's never done? And Hossein Rahman, the CEO Aleph Jawbone, really understands that you need a different structure. So in a way, the different structure is that we're partners. It's a partnership. We can continue to work and dedicate ourselves to this project, and then we all sort of share in the rewards. And here's another project, another partnership type approach. This is called Y-Water, and it's this guy from Los Angeles, Thomas Arndt, Austrian originally, who came to us, and all he wanted to do is to create a healthy drink, or an organic drink, for his kids to replace the sort of high sugar content sodas that he's trying to sort of get them away from. So we worked on this bottle, and it's completely symmetrical in every dimension. And this allows the bottle to turn into a game. The bottles connect together, and you can create different shapes, different forms. Wow. Thank you. And then while we were doing this, the shape of the bottle upside down reminded us of a Y. And then we thought, well, these words, why and why not, are probably the most important words that kids ask. So we called it Why Water. And so this is another place where it all sort of comes together in the same room. The three-dimensional design, the ideas, the branding, it all becomes sort of deeply sort of connected. And then, the other thing about this project is, we bring intellectual property, we bring a marketing approach, we bring all this stuff, but I think at the end of the day what we bring is these values, and these values create a soul for the companies we work with. And it's especially rewarding when your design work becomes a creative endeavor, when others can be creative and do more with it. Here's another project which I think really sort of emulates that. This is the One Laptop Per Child, the $100 laptop. This picture is incredible. In Nigeria, people carry their most precious belongings on their heads. This girl is going to school with a laptop on her head. To me, it just means so much. But when Nicholas Negroponte, and he's spoken about this project a lot, he's the founder of OLPC, came to us, he really, about 2.5 years ago, there were some clear sort of ideas. He wanted to bring education, and he wanted to bring technology, and those are pillars of his life, but also pillars of the mission of One Laptop Per Child. But the third pillar that he talked about was design. And at the time, I wasn't really working on computers. I didn't really want to from the previous adventure. But what he said was really significant, is that design was going to be why the kids were going to love this product, how we were going to make it low cost, robust, plus he said he was going to get rid of the cap lock key and the num lock key too. So I was convinced. We designed it to be iconic, to look different, to look like it's for a kid, but not like a toy. And then all these the integration of all these great technologies which you've heard about, the Wi-Fi antennas that allow the kids to connect, the screen which you can read in sunlight, the keyboard which is made out of rubber and is protected from the environment. All these great technologies really happened because of the passion and the OLPC people and the engineers. They fought the suppliers, they fought the the manufacturers. It was such a, they fought like animals for this to remain the way it is. And in a way, it is that will that makes projects like this one, allows the process from not sort of destroying the original idea. And I think this is something really important. So now, you get these pictures. You get up in the morning and you see the kids in Nigeria, and you see them in Uruguay with the computers, and in Mongolia. And we went away from, obviously the beige. It's colorful, it's fun. In fact, you can see each logo is a little bit different. It's because we were able to bring to run during the manufacturing process 20 colors for the X and the O, which is the name of the computer. And by mixing them on the manufacturing floor, you get 20 times 20, you get 400 different options there. So the lessons from seeing the kids using them in the developing world are incredible. But this is my nephew Anthony in Switzerland. And he had the laptop for an afternoon, and I had to take it back. It was hard. And it was a prototype. And a month and a half later, I come back to Switzerland, and there he's playing with his own version. Like paper and cardboard. So I'm going to finish with one last project, and this is a little bit more of adult play. Some of you might have heard about the New York City condom. It's actually just launched, and actually launched on Valentine's Day, February 14th, about 10 days ago. So the Department of Health in New York came to us, and they needed a way to sort of distribute 36 million condoms for free to the citizens of New York. So a pretty big endeavor. We worked on the dispensers. These are the dispensers. There's this friendly shape. You know, it's about it's a little bit like designing a fire hydrant. You know, it has to be, you know, easily serviceable. It has to sort of tell, you have to know where it is and what it does. We also designed the condoms themselves. And I was just in New York at the launch, and I went to see all these places where they're installed. This is at a Puerto Rican little mom and pop store, you know, at a bar on Christopher Street, at a pool hall. I mean, they're being installed in like homeless clinics everywhere. Of course, you know, clubs and discos too. And here's the public service announcement for this project. Get some. So, you know, this is really where design sort of is able to create a conversation. I was in these venues, and people were, you know, really like into getting them. They were excited. It was creating a, you know, It was breaking the ice. You know, it was getting over a stigma, and I think that's also what design can do. So I was gonna throw some condoms in the room and whatnot, but I'm not sure it's the etiquette here. Yeah? All right. I have only a few. So I have more. You can always ask me for some more later. And if anybody asks why, you know, you're carrying a condom, you can just say you like the design. You know. So I'll finish with just one thought. You know, if we all work together on creating value, but if we really keep in mind the values of the work that we do, I think, you know, we can change, you know, the work that we do. We can change these values, can change the companies we work with, and eventually together, maybe we can change the world. So thank you.
Yves Bahar showed us the narrative in objects. Next, Michael Shermer reveals the pattern behind self-deception. We will explore why our brains invent meaning, sometimes where none exists. This is Michael Shermer's 2010 TED Talk.
So since I was here last, in 2006, we discovered that global climate change is turning out to be a pretty serious issue, so we covered that fairly extensively in Skeptic magazine. We investigate all kinds of scientific and quasi-scientific controversies. But it turns out we don't really have to worry about any of this because the world's going to end in 2012. Another update, you will recall, because I introduced you guys to the Quadro Tracker. It's like a water dowsing device. It's just a hollow piece of plastic with an antenna that swivels around, and you walk around, and it points to things. Like if you're looking for marijuana in students' lockers, it'll, you know, like point right to somebody. Oh, sorry. This particular one that was given to me finds golf balls. especially if you're at a golf course and you check under enough bushes. Well, under the category of what's the harm of silly stuff like this device, the ADE 651, was sold to the Iraqi government for $40,000 a piece. It's just like this one, completely worthless, in which it allegedly worked by electrostatic magnetic ion attraction, which translates to pseudoscientific baloney would be the nice word, in which you string together a bunch of words that sound good, but it does absolutely nothing. In this case, allowing at trespass points, allowing people to go through because your little tracker device said they were okay, actually cost lives. So there is a danger to pseudoscience and believing in this sort of thing. So what I want to talk about today is belief. I want to believe, and you do too. And in fact, I think my thesis here is that belief is the natural state of things. It is the default option. We just believe. We believe all sorts of things. Belief is natural. Disbelief, skepticism, science is not natural. It's more difficult. It's uncomfortable to not believe things. So like Fox Mulder on X-Files, who wants to believe in UFOs, well, we all do. And the reason for that is because we have a belief engine in our brains. Essentially, we are pattern-seeking primates. We connect the dots. A is connected to B, B is connected to C, and sometimes A really is connected to B. And that's called association learning. We find patterns. We make those connections, whether it's Pavlov's dog here associating the sound of the bell with the food, and then he salivates to the sound of the bell, or whether it's a Skinnerian rat in which he's having an association between his behavior and a reward for it, and therefore he repeats the behavior. In fact, what Skinner discovered is that if you put a pigeon in a box like this and he has to press one of these two keys and he tries to figure out what the pattern is, and you give him a little reward in the hopper box there, if you just randomly assign rewards such that there is no pattern, they will figure out any kind of pattern, and whatever they were doing just before they got the reward, they repeat that particular pattern. Sometimes it was even spinning around twice counterclockwise, once clockwise, and peck the key twice. And that's called superstition, and that, I'm afraid, we will always have with us. I call this process patternicity, that is, the tendency to find meaningful patterns in both meaningful and meaningless noise. When we do this process, we make two types of errors. A type 1 error, or false positive, is believing a pattern is real when it's not. Our second type of error is a false negative. A type 2 error is not believing a pattern is real when it is. So let's do a thought experiment. You are a hominid 3 million years ago walking on the plains of Africa. Your name is Lucy, okay. And you hear a rustle in the grass. Is it a dangerous predator, or is it just the wind? Your next decision could be the most important one of your life. Well, if you think that the rustle in the grass is a dangerous predator and it turns out it's just the wind, you've made an error in cognition. You made a type 1 error, false positive. But no harm, you just move away, you're more cautious, you're more vigilant. On the other hand, if you believe that the rustle in the grass is just the wind and it turns out it's a dangerous predator, you're lunch. You've just won a Darwin Award. You've been taken out of the gene pool. Now, the problem here is that patternicities will occur whenever the cost of making a type 1 error is less than the cost of making a type 2 error. This is the only equation in the talk, by the way. We have a pattern detection problem. That is, assessing the difference between a type 1 and a type 2 error is highly problematic, especially in split-second life and death situations. So the default position is just believe all patterns are real. All rustles in the grass are dangerous predators and not just the wind. And so I think that we evolved. There was a natural selection for the propensity for our belief engines, our pattern-seeking brain processes, to always find meaningful patterns and infuse them with these sort of predatory or intentional agencies that I'll come back to. So, for example, what do you see here? It's a horse head, that's right. It looks like a horse, must be a horse. That's a pattern. And is it really a horse, or is it more like a frog? See, our pattern detection device, which appears to be located in the anterior cingulate cortex, it's our little sort of detection device there, can be easily fooled, and this is the problem. For example, what do you see here? Yes, of course, it's a cow. Once I prime the brain, it's called cognitive priming. Once I prime the brain to see it, it pops back out again, even without the pattern that I've imposed on it. And what do you see here? Some people see a Dalmatian dog. Yes, there it is. And there's the prime. So when I go back, Without the prime, your brain already has the model, so you can see it again. What do you see here? Planet Saturn, yes, that's good. How about here? Just shout out anything you see. That's a good audience, Chris, because there's nothing in this. Well, allegedly, there's nothing. This is an experiment done by Jennifer Whitson at UT Austin on corporate environments and whether uncertain feelings of uncertainty and out of control makes people see illusory patterns. That is, almost everybody sees the planet Saturn. People that are put in a condition of feeling out of control are more likely to see something in this, which is allegedly patternless. In other words, the propensity to feel these or find these patterns goes up when there's a lack of control. For example, baseball players are notoriously superstitious when they're batting, but not so much when they're fielding. Because fielders are successful 90 to 95% of the time. The best batters fail 7 out of 10 times. So their superstitions, their patternicities are all associated with feelings of lack of control and so forth. What do you see in this particular one here, in this field? Anybody see a object there? There actually is something here, but it's degraded. While you're thinking about that, this was an experiment done by Susan Blackmore, a psychologist in England, who showed subjects this degraded image and then ran a correlation between their scores on an ESP test, how much did they believe in the paranormal, supernatural, angels, and so forth. And those who scored high on the ESP scale tended to not only see more patterns in the degraded images, but incorrect patterns. Here is what you show subjects. The fish, it's degraded 20%, 50%, and then the one I showed you, 70%. A similar experiment was done by another British psychologist named Peter Bruegger, who found significantly more patterns, meaningful patterns, were perceived on the right hemisphere via the left visual field than the left hemisphere. So if you present subjects the images such that it's going to end up on the right hemisphere instead of the left, then they're more likely to see patterns than if you put it on the left hemisphere. Our right hemisphere appears to be where a lot of this patternicity occurs. So what we're trying to do is bore into the brain to see where all this happens. Bruegger and his colleague Christine Moore gave subjects L-DOPA. L-DOPA is a drug, as you know, given for treating Parkinson's disease, which is related to a decrease in dopamine. L-DOPA increases dopamine. An increase in dopamine caused subjects to see more patterns than those that did not receive the dopamine. So dopamine appears to be the drug associated with patternicity. In fact, neuroleptic drugs that are used to eliminate psychotic behavior, things like paranoia, delusions, and hallucinations, these are patternicities. They're incorrect patterns. They're false positives. They're type 1 errors. And if you give them drugs that are dopamine antagonists, they go away. That is, you decrease the amount of dopamine, and their tendency to see patterns like that decreases. On the other hand, amphetamines like in cocaine are dopamine agonists. They increase the amount of dopamine. So you're more likely to feel in a euphoric state, creativity, find more patterns. In fact, I saw Robin Williams recently talk about how he thought he was much funnier when he was doing cocaine when he had that issue than now. So perhaps more dopamine is related to more creativity. Dopamine, I think, changes our signal-to-noise ratio. That is, how accurate we are in finding patterns. If it's too low, you're more likely to make too many type 2 errors. You miss the real patterns. You don't want to be too skeptical. If you're too skeptical, you miss the really interesting good ideas. Just right, you're creative, and yet you don't fall for too much baloney. Too high, and maybe you see patterns everywhere. Every time somebody looks at you, you think people are staring at you, you think people are talking about you, and if you go too far on that, that's just simply labeled as madness. It's a distinction perhaps we might make between two Nobel laureates, Richard Feynman and John Nash. One sees maybe just the right number of patterns to win a Nobel Prize. The other one also, but maybe too many patterns, and we then call that schizophrenia. So the signal-to-noise ratio then presents us with a pattern detection problem. And of course, you all know exactly what this is, right? And what pattern do you see here? Again, I'm putting your anterior cingulate cortex to the test here, causing you conflicting pattern detections. You know, of course, this is via uno. Shoes. These are sandals. Pretty sexy feet, I must say. Maybe a little photoshopped. And of course, the ambiguous figures that seem to flip-flop back and forth. Turns out what you're thinking about a lot influences what you tend to see. And you see the lamp here, I know, because we have lights on here. Of course, thanks to the environmentalist movement, we're all sensitive to the plight of marine mammals. So what you see in this particular ambiguous figure is, of course, the dolphins, right? You see a dolphin here, and there's a dolphin, and there's a dolphin. That's a dolphin tail there, guys. If we can give you conflicting data, again, your ACC is going to be going into hyperdrive. If you look down here, it's fine. If you look up here, then you get conflicting data, and then we have to flip the image for you to see that it's a setup. The impossible crate illusion, it's easy to fool the brain in 2D. So you say, oh, come on, Shermer, anybody can do that in a Psych 101 text with an illusion like that. Well, here's the late, great Jerry Andrus's impossible crate illusion in 3D, in which Jerry is standing inside the impossible crate. And he was kind enough to post this and give us the reveal. Of course, camera angle is everything. The photographer is over there, and this board appears to overlap with this one, and this one with that one, and so on. But even when I take it away, the illusion is so powerful because of how our brains are wired to find those certain kinds of patterns. This is a fairly new one that throws us off because of the conflicting patterns of comparing this angle with that angle. In fact, it's the exact same picture side by side. So what you're doing is comparing that angle instead of with this one, but with that one, and so your brain is fooled. Yet again, your pattern detection devices are fooled. Faces are easy to see because we have an additional evolved facial recognition software in our temporal lobes. Here's some faces on the side of a rock. I'm actually not even sure if this might be Photoshop, but anyway, the point is still made. Which one of these looks odd to you? And a quick reaction, which one looks odd? The one on the left. Okay, I'll rotate it so it'll be the one on the right, and you are correct. Fairly famous illusion that was first done with Margaret Thatcher. Now they trade up to politicians every time. Well, why is this happening? Well, we know exactly where it happens, in the temporal lobe, right across, sort of above your ear there, in a little structure called the fusiform gyrus. And there's two types of cells that do this, that record facial features, either globally or specifically these large rapid-firing cells. First, look at the general face, so you recognize Obama immediately, and then you notice something quite a little bit odd about the eyes and the mouth, especially when they're upside down. You're engaging that general facial recognition software there. Now, I said back in our little thought experiment, you're a hominid walking on the plains of Africa. Is it just the wind or a dangerous predator? What's the difference between those? Well, a wind is inanimate. A dangerous predator is an intentional agent. And I call this process agenticity. That is the tendency to infuse patterns with meaning, intention, and agency, often invisible beings from the top down. This is an idea that we got from a fellow TEDster here, Dan Dennett, who talked about taking the intentional stance. So it's a type of that expanded to explain, I think, a lot of different things. Souls, spirits, ghosts, gods, demons, angels, aliens, intelligent designers, government conspiracists, and all manner of invisible agents with power and intention are believed to haunt our world and control our lives. I think it's the basis of animism and polytheism and monotheism. It's the belief that aliens are somehow more advanced than us, more moral than us, and the narratives always are that they're coming here to save us and rescue us from on high. The intelligent designer is always portrayed as this super intelligent moral being that comes down to design life. Even the idea that government can rescue us, that's no longer the wave of the future, but that is, I think, a type of agenticity. The projecting somebody up there, big and powerful, will come rescue us. And this is also, I think, the basis of conspiracy theories. There's somebody hiding behind there, pulling the strings, whether it's the Illuminati or the Bilderbergers. But this is a pattern detection problem, isn't it? Some patterns are real and some are not. Was JFK assassinated by a conspiracy or by a lone assassin? Well, if you go there, there's people there on any given day, like when I went there here, showing me where the different shooters were. My favorite one was he was in the manhole, and he popped out at the last second and took that shot. But of course, Lincoln was assassinated by a conspiracy, so we can't just uniformly dismiss all patterns like that, because let's face it, some patterns are real. Some conspiracies really are true. Explains a lot, maybe. And 9/11 as a conspiracy theory. It is a conspiracy. We did a whole issue on it. 19 members of Al-Qaeda plotting to fly planes into buildings constitutes a conspiracy, but that's not what the 9/11 truthers think. They think it was an inside job by the Bush administration. Well, that's a whole nother lecture, but you know how we know that 9/11 was not orchestrated by the Bush administration? Because it worked. So we are natural-born dualists. Our agenticity process comes from the fact that we can enjoy movies like these because we can imagine an essence continuing on. We know that if you stimulate the temporal lobe, you can produce a feeling of out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, which you can do by just touching an electrode to the temporal lobe there. Or you can do it through loss of consciousness by accelerating in a centrifuge. You get a hypoxia or a lower oxygen, and the brain then senses that there's an out-of-body experience. You can use, which I did, went up and did Michael Persinger's God helmet that bombards your temporal lobes with electromagnetic waves, and you get a sense of out-of-body experience. So I'm going to end here with a short video clip that sort of brings all this together. It's just a minute and a half. It ties together all this into the power of expectation and the power of belief. Go ahead and roll it.
This is the venue they chose for their fake auditions for an advert for lip balm.
We're hoping that we can use part of this in a national commercial, right? And this is a test on some lip balms that we have over here. And these are our models who are going to help us, Roger and Matt. And we have our own lip balm, and we have a leading brand. Would you have any problem kissing our models to test them? You wouldn't? No. You think that was fine?
That would be fine.
Okay. So that this is a blind test, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and put a blindfold on. Okay, now can you see anything?
No.
Hold up so you can't even see down.
Okay.
It's completely blind now, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now what I'm going to be looking for in this test is how soft makes the lips, okay, the texture, right, and maybe if you can discern any flavor or not.
Okay.
Have you ever done a kissing test before? Yes. Take one step in. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to pucker up big, and lean in just a little bit, okay? Okay. All right. Jennifer, how did that feel?
Good.
Oh my God!
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks.
This is Public Knowledge Radio. I'm Jake, and I'll be your host through a constant stream of lectures, reports, audiobooks, and other thought-provoking audio, broadcasting 24/7, no ads, no politics, just knowledge made public. Next up, Neri Oxman bridges biology and architecture in Design at the Intersection of Technology and Biology, where buildings learn from nature. This is Neri Oxman's TED Talk from 2015.
Two twin domes, two radically opposed design cultures. One is made of thousands of steel parts, the other of a single silk thread. One is synthetic, the other organic. One is imposed on the environment, the other creates it. One is designed for nature, the other is designed by her. Michelangelo said that when he looked at raw marble, he saw a figure struggling to be free. The chisel was Michelangelo's only tool. But living things are not chiseled. They grow. And in our smallest units of life, our cells, we carry all the information that's required for every other cell to function and to replicate. Tools also have consequences. At least since the Industrial Revolution, the world of design has been dominated by the rigors of manufacturing and mass production. Assembly lines have dictated a world made of parts, framing the imagination of designers and architects who have been trained to think about their objects as assemblies of discrete parts with distinct functions. But you don't find homogeneous material assemblies in nature. Take the human skin, for example. Our facial skins are thin, with large pores. Our back skins are thicker with small pores. One acts mainly as filter, the other mainly as barrier, and yet it's the same skin, no parts, no assemblies. It's a system that gradually varies its functionality by varying elasticity. So here, this is a split screen to represent my split worldview, the split personality of every designer and architect operating today between the chisel and the gene, between machine and organism, between assembly and growth, between Henry Ford and Charles Darwin. These two worldviews, my left brain and right brain, analysis and synthesis, will play out on the two screens behind me. My work at its simplest level is about uniting these two worldviews, moving away from assembly and closer into growth. You're probably asking yourselves, why now? Why was this not possible 10 or even 5 years ago? We live in a very special time in history, a rare time. A time when the confluence of four fields is giving designers access to tools we've never had access to before. These fields are computational design, allowing us to design complex forms with simple code. Additive manufacturing, letting us produce parts by adding material rather than carving it out. Materials engineering, which lets us design behavior of materials in high resolution. And synthetic biology, enabling us to design new biological functionality by editing DNA. And at the intersection of these four fields, my team and I create. Please meet the minds and hands of my students. We design objects and products and structures and tools across scales, from the large scale, like this robotic arm with an 80-foot diameter reach with a vehicular base that will one day soon print entire buildings, to nanoscale graphics made entirely of genetically engineered microorganisms that glow in the dark. Here we've reimagined the mashrabiyah, an archetype of ancient Arabic architecture, and created a screen where every aperture is uniquely sized to shape the form of light and heat moving through it. In our next project, we explore the possibility of creating a cape and skirt. This was for Paris Fashion Show with Iris van Herpen. Like a second skin that are made of a single part, stiff at the contours, flexible around the waist. Together with my long-term 3D printing collaborator, Stratasys, we 3D printed this cape and skirt with no seams between the cells, and I'll show more objects like it. This helmet combines stiff and soft materials in 20-micron resolution. This is the resolution of a human hair. It's also the resolution of a CT scanner. The designers have access to such high-resolution analytic and synthetic tools enables us to design products that fit not only the shape of our bodies, but also the physiological makeup of our tissues. Next, we designed an acoustic chair, a chair that would be at once structural, comfortable, and would also absorb sound. Professor Carter and I, my collaborator, turned to nature for inspiration, and by designing this irregular surface pattern, it becomes sound absorbent. We printed its surface out of 44 different properties, varying in rigidity, opacity, and color, corresponding to pressure points on the human body. Its surface, as in nature, varies its functionality not by adding another material or another assembly, but by continuously and delicately varying material property. But is nature ideal? Are there no parts in nature? I wasn't raised in a religious Jewish home, but when I was young, my grandmother used to tell me stories from the Hebrew Bible, and one of them stuck with me and came to define much of what I care about. As she recounts, on the third day of creation, God commands the earth to grow a fruit-bearing fruit tree. For this first fruit tree, there was to be no differentiation between trunk, branches, leaves, and fruit. The whole tree was a fruit. Instead, the land grew trees that have bark and stems and flowers. The land created a world made of parts. I often ask myself, what would design be like if objects were made of a single part? Would we return to a better stage of creation? So we looked for that biblical material, that fruit-bearing, fruitery kind of material, and we found it. The second most abundant biopolymer on the planet is called chitin, and some 100 million tons of it are produced every year by organisms such as shrimps, crabs, scorpions, and butterflies. We thought if we could tune its properties, we could generate structures that are multifunctional out of a single part. So that's what we did. We called legal seafood. We ordered a bunch of shrimp shells. We grinded them, and we produced chitosan paste. By varying chemical concentrations, we were able to achieve a wide array of properties, from dark, stiff, and opaque to light, soft, and transparent. In order to print these structures in large scale, we built a robotically controlled extrusion system with multiple nozzles. The robot would vary material properties on the fly and create these 12-feet-long structures made of a single material, 100% recyclable. When the parts are ready, they're left to dry and find their form naturally upon contact with air. So why are we still designing with plastics? The air bubbles that were a byproduct of the printing process were used to contain photosynthetic microorganisms that first appeared on our planet 3.5 billion years ago, as we learned yesterday. Together with our collaborators at Harvard and MIT, we embedded bacteria that were genetically engineered to rapidly capture carbon from the atmosphere and convert it into sugar. For the first time, we were able to generate structures that would seamlessly transition from beam to mesh, and if scaled even larger, to windows. A fruit-bearing fruit tree. Working with an ancient material, one of the first life forms on the planet, plenty of water, and a little bit of synthetic biology, we were able to transform a structure made of shrimp shells into an architecture that behaves like a tree. And here's the best part. For objects designed to biodegrade, put them in the sea, and they will nourish marine life. Place them in soil, and they will help grow a tree. The setting for our next exploration, using the same design principles, was the solar system. We looked for the possibility of creating life-sustaining clothing for interplanetary voyages. To do that, we needed to contain bacteria and be able to control their flow. So like the periodic table, we came up with our own table of the elements. New life forms that were computationally grown, additively manufactured, and biologically augmented. I like to think of synthetic biology as liquid alchemy. Only instead of transmuting precious metals, you're synthesizing new biological functionality inside very small channels. It's called microfluidics. We 3D printed our own channels in order to control the flow of these liquid bacterial cultures. In our first piece of clothing, we combined two microorganisms. The first is cyanobacteria. It lives in our oceans and in freshwater ponds. And the second, E. coli, the bacterium that inhabits the human gut. One converts light into sugar. The other consumes that sugar and produces biofuels useful for the built environment. Now, these two microorganisms never interact in nature. In fact, they never met each other. They've been here engineered for the first time to have a relationship inside a piece of clothing. Think of it as evolution not by natural selection, but evolution by design. In order to contain these relationships, we've created a single channel that resembles the digestive tract that will help flow these bacteria and alter their function along the way. We then started growing these channels on the human body, varying material properties according to the desired functionality. Where we wanted more photosynthesis, we would design more transparent channels. This wearable digestive system, when it's stretched end to end, it spans 60 meters. This is half the length of a football field and 10 times as long as our small intestines. And here it is for the first time, unveiled at TED, our first photosynthetic wearable, liquid channels glowing with life inside a wearable clothing. Thank you. Mary Shelley said, "We're unfashioned creatures, but only half made up." What if design could provide that other half? What if we could create structures that would augment living matter? What if we could create personal microbiomes that would scan our skins, repair damaged tissue, and sustain our bodies? Think of this as a form of edited biology. This entire collection, Wanderers, that was named after planets, was not, to me, really about fashion per se, but it provided an opportunity to speculate about the future of our race on our planet and beyond, to combine scientific insight with lots of mystery, and to move away from the age of the machine to a new age of symbiosis between our bodies, the microorganisms that we inhabit, our products, and even our buildings. I call this material ecology. To do this, we always need to return back to nature. By now, you know that a 3D printer prints material in layers. You also know that nature doesn't. It grows, it adds with sophistication. The silkworm cocoon, for example, creates a highly sophisticated architecture, a home inside which to metamorphosize. No additive manufacturing today gets even close to this level of sophistication. It does so by combining not two materials, but two proteins in different concentrations. One acts as the structure, the other is the glue or the matrix holding those fibers together. And this happens across scales. The silkworm first attaches itself to the environment, it creates a tensile structure, and it then starts spinning a compressive cocoon. Tension and compression, the two forces of life, manifested in a single material. In order to better understand how this complex process works, we glued a tiny earth magnet to the head of a silkworm, to the spinneret. We placed it inside a box with magnetic sensors, and that allowed us to create this three-dimensional point cloud and visualize the complex architecture of the silkworm cocoon. However, when we placed the silkworm on a flat patch, not inside a box, we realized it would spin a flat cocoon, and it would still healthily metamorphosize. So we started designing different environments, different scaffolds, and we discovered that the shape, the composition, the structure of the cocoon was directly informed by the environment. Silkworms are often boiled to death inside their cocoons. Their silk unraveled and used in the textile industry. We realized that designing these templates allowed us to give shape to raw silk without boiling a single cocoon. They would healthily metamorphosize, and we would be able to create these things. So we scaled this process up to architectural scale. We had a robot spin the template out of silk, and we placed it on our site. We knew silkworms migrated towards darker and colder areas. So we used a sun path diagram to reveal the distribution of light and heat on our structure. We then created holes or apertures that would lock in the rays of light and heat, distributing those silkworms on the structure. We were ready to receive the caterpillars. We ordered 6,500 silkworms from an online silk farm. And after 4 weeks of feeding, they were ready to spin with us. We placed them carefully at the bottom rim of the scaffold. And as they spin, they pupate, they mate, they lay eggs, and life begins all over again, just like us, but much, much shorter. Bucky Fuller said, "The tension is the great integrity." And he was right. As they spin biological silk over robotically spun silk, they give this entire pavilion its integrity. And over 2 to 3 weeks, 6,500 silkworms spin 6,500 kilometers. In a curious symmetry, this is also the length of the Silk Road. The moths, after they hatch, they produce 1.5 million eggs. This could be used for 250 additional pavilions for the future. So here they are, the two world views. One spins silk out of a robotic arm. The other fills in the gaps. If the final frontier of design is to breathe life into the products and the buildings around us, to form a true material ecology, then designers must unite these two worldviews. Which brings us back, of course, to the beginning. Here's to a new age of design, a new age of creation, that takes us from a nature-inspired design to a design-inspired nature, and that demands of us, for the first time, that we mother nature. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Neri Oxman reimagines what grows. Now, Stefan Petranek imagines what lives off Earth. This is his 2015 TED Talk, Your Kids Might Live on Mars. Here's how they'll survive.
Strap yourselves in. We're going to Mars. Not just a few astronauts, thousands of people are going to colonize Mars, and I am telling you that they're going to do this soon. Some of you will end up working on projects on Mars, and I guarantee that some of your children will end up living there. That probably sounds preposterous, so I'm going to share with you how and when that will happen. But first, I want to discuss the obvious question. Why the heck should we do this? 12 years ago, I gave a TED Talk on 10 ways the world could end suddenly. We are incredibly vulnerable to the whims of our own galaxy. A single large asteroid could take us out forever. To survive, we have to reach beyond the home planet. Think what a tragedy it would be if all that humans have accomplished were suddenly obliterated. And there's another reason we should go. Exploration is in our DNA. 2 million years ago, humans evolved in Africa and then slowly but surely spread out across the entire planet by reaching into the wilderness that was beyond their horizons. This stuff is inside us. And they prospered doing that. Some of the greatest advances in civilization and technology came because we explored. Yes, we could do a lot of good with the money it will take to establish a thriving colony on Mars. And yes, we should all be taking far better care of our own home planet. And yes, I worry we could screw up Mars the way we've screwed up Earth. But think for a moment what we had when John F. Kennedy told us we would put a human on the moon. He excited an entire generation to dream. Think how inspired we will be to see a landing on Mars. Perhaps then we will look back at Earth and see that that is one people instead of many, and perhaps then we will look back at Earth as we struggle to survive on Mars and realize how precious the home planet is. So, let me tell you about the extraordinary adventure we're about to undertake. But first, a few fascinating facts about where we're going. This picture actually represents the true size of Mars compared to Earth. Mars is not our sister planet. It's far less than half the size of the Earth. And yet, despite the fact that it's smaller, the surface area of Mars that you can stand on is equivalent to the surface area of the Earth that you can stand on, because the Earth is mostly covered by water. The atmosphere on Mars is really thin, 100 times thinner than on Earth, and it's not breathable. It's 96% carbon dioxide. It's really cold there. The average temperature is minus 81 degrees, although there is quite a range of temperature. A day on Mars is about as long as a day on Earth, plus about 39 minutes. Seasons and years on Mars are twice as long as they are on Earth. And for anybody who wants to strap on some wings and go flying one day, Mars has a lot less gravity than on Earth, and it's the kind of place where you could jump over your car instead of walk around it. Now, as you can see, Mars isn't exactly Earth-like, but it's by far the most livable other place in our entire solar system. Here's the problem. Mars is a long way away, 1,000 times farther away from us than our own moon. The moon is 250,000 miles away, And it took Apollo astronauts 3 days to get there. Mars is 250 million miles away, and it will take us 8 months to get there, 240 days. And that's only if we launch on a very specific day at a very specific time once every 2 years, when Mars and the Earth are just aligned just so the distance that the rocket would have to travel will be the shortest. 240 days is a long time to spend trapped with your colleagues in a tin can. And meanwhile, our track record of getting to Mars is lousy. We and the Russians, the Europeans, the Japanese, the Chinese, and the Indians have actually sent 44 rockets there, and the vast majority of them have either missed or crashed. Only about a third of the missions to Mars have been successful. And we don't at the moment have a rocket big enough to get there anyway. We once had that rocket, the Saturn V. A couple of Saturn Vs would have gotten us there. It was the most magnificent machine ever built by humans, and it was the rocket that took us to the moon. But the last Saturn V was used in 1973 to launch the Skylab space station, and we decided to do something called the shuttle instead of continuing on to Mars after we landed on the moon. The biggest rocket we have now is only half big enough to get us anything to Mars. So, getting to Mars is not going to be easy, and that brings up a really interesting question. How soon will the first humans actually land here? Now, some pundits think if we got there by 2050, that'd be a pretty good achievement. These days, NASA seems to be saying that it can get humans to Mars by 2040. Maybe they can't. I believe that they can get human beings into Mars orbit by 2035. But frankly, I don't think they're going to bother in 2035 to send a rocket to Mars because we will already be there. We're going to land in Mars in 2027. And the reason is this man is determined to make that happen. His name is Elon Musk. He's the CEO of Tesla Motors and SpaceX. Now, he actually told me that we would land on Mars by 2025, but Elon Musk is more optimistic than I am, and that's going a ways, so I'm giving him a couple of years of slack. Still, you got to ask yourself, can this guy really do this by 2025 or 2027? Well, let's put a decade with Elon Musk into a little perspective. Where was this 10 years ago? That's the Tesla electric automobile. In 2005, a lot of people in the automobile industry were saying we would not have a decent electric car for 50 years. And where was that? That is SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket lifting 6 tons of supplies to the International Space Station. 10 years ago, SpaceX had not launched anything or fired a rocket to anywhere. So I think it's a pretty good bet that the person who is revolutionizing the automobile industry in less than 10 years and the person who created an entire rocket company in less than 10 years will get us to Mars by 2027. Now, you need to know this. Governments and robots no longer control this game. Private companies are leaping into space, and they will be happy to take you to Mars. And that raises a really big question. Can we actually live there? Now, NASA may not be able to get us there until 2040, or we may get there a long time before NASA, but NASA has taken a huge responsibility in figuring out how we can live on Mars. Let's look at the problem this way. Here's what you need to live on Earth: food, water, shelter, and clothing. And here's what you need to live on Mars: all of the above plus oxygen. So let's look at the most important thing on this list first. Water is the basis of all life as we know it, and it's far too heavy for us to carry water from the Earth to Mars to live. So we have to find water if our life is going to succeed on Mars. And if you look at Mars, it looks really dry. It looks like the entire planet is a desert. But it turns out that it's not. The soil alone on Mars contains up to 60% water. And a number of orbiters that we still have flying around Mars have shown us, and by the way, that's a real photograph, that lots of craters on Mars have a sheet of water ice in them. It's not a bad place to start a colony. Now, here's a view of a little dig the Phoenix lander did in 2008, showing that just below the surface of the soil is ice. That white stuff is ice. In the second picture, which is 4 days later than the first picture, you can see that some of it is evaporating. Orbiters also tell us that there are huge amounts of underground water on Mars, as well as glaciers. In fact, if only the water ice at the poles on Mars melted, most of the planet would be under 30 feet of water. So there's plenty of water there, but most of it's ice, most of it's underground. It takes a lot of energy to get it and a lot of human labor. This is a device cooked up at the University of Washington back in 1998. It's basically a low-tech dehumidifier, and it turns out that Mars' atmosphere is often 100% humid. So this device can extract all the water that humans will need simply from the atmosphere on Mars. Next, we have to worry about what we will breathe. Frankly, I was really shocked to find out that NASA has this problem worked out. This is a scientist at MIT named Michael Hecht. And he's developed this machine, MOXIE. I love this thing. It's a reverse fuel cell, essentially, that sucks in the Martian atmosphere and pumps out oxygen. And you have to remember that CO2, carbon dioxide, which is 96% of Mars' atmosphere, CO2 is basically 78% oxygen. Now, the next big rover that NASA sends to Mars in 2020 is going to have one of these devices aboard, and it will be able to produce enough oxygen to keep one person alive indefinitely. But the secret to this, and that's just for testing, the secret to this is that this thing was designed from the get-go to be scalable by a factor of 100. Next, what will we eat? Well, we'll use hydroponics to grow food, but we're not going to be able to grow more than 15 to 20% of our food there, at least not until water is running on the surface of Mars and we actually have the probability and the capability of planting crops. In the meantime, most of our food will arrive from Earth and it will be dried. And then we need some shelter. At first, we can use inflatable pressurized buildings as well as the landers themselves. But this really only works during the daytime. There is too much solar radiation and too much radiation from cosmic rays. So we really have to go underground. Now, it turns out that the soil on Mars, by and large, is perfect for making bricks. And NASA has figured this one out too. They're going to throw some polymer plastic into the bricks, shove them in a microwave oven, and then you will be able to build buildings with really thick walls. Or we may choose to live underground in caves or in lava tubes, of which there are plenty. And finally, there's clothing. On Earth, we have miles of atmosphere piled up on us, which creates 15 pounds of pressure on our bodies at all times, and we're constantly pushing out against that. On Mars, there's hardly any atmospheric pressure. So Davin Newman, a scientist at MIT, has created this sleek spacesuit. It will keep us together, block radiation, and keep us warm. So let's think about this for a minute. Food, shelter, clothing, water, oxygen. We can do this. We really can. But it's still a little complicated and a little difficult. So that leads to the next big, really big step in living the good life on Mars, and that's terraforming the planet, making it more like Earth, re-engineering an entire planet. That sounds like a lot of hubris, but the truth is that the technology to do everything I'm about to tell you already exists. First, we've got to warm it up. Mars is incredibly cold because it has a very thin atmosphere. The answer lies here at the South Pole and at the North Pole of Mars, both of which are covered with an incredible amount of frozen carbon dioxide, dry ice. If we heat it up, it sublimes directly into the atmosphere and thickens the atmosphere the same way it does on Earth. And as we know, CO2 is an incredibly potent greenhouse gas. Now, my favorite way of doing this is to erect a very, very large solar sail and focus it, essentially serves as a mirror, and focus it on the South Pole of Mars at first. As the planet spins, it will heat up all that dry ice, sublime it, and it will go into the atmosphere. It actually won't take long for the temperature on Mars to start rising, probably less than 20 years. Right now, on a perfect day at the equator, in the middle of summer, on Mars, temperatures can actually reach 70 degrees, but then they go down to minus 100 at night. What we're shooting for is a runaway greenhouse effect. Enough temperature rise to see a lot of that ice on Mars, especially the ice in the ground, melt. Then we get some real magic. As the atmosphere gets thicker, everything gets better. We get more protection from radiation. More atmosphere makes us warmer, makes the planet warmer, so we get running water, and that makes crops possible. Then more water vapor goes into the air, forming yet another potent greenhouse gas. It will rain and it will snow on Mars. And a thicker atmosphere will create enough pressure so that we can throw away those spacesuits. We only need about 5 pounds of pressure to survive. Eventually, Mars will be made to feel a lot like British Columbia. We'll still be left with the complicated problem of making the atmosphere breathable, and frankly, that could take 1,000 years to accomplish. But humans are amazingly smart and incredibly adaptable. There is no telling what our future technology will be able to accomplish, and no telling what we can do with our own bodies. In biology right now, we are on the very verge of being able to control our own genetics, what the genes in our own bodies are doing, and certainly, eventually, our own evolution. We could end up with a species of human being on the Earth that is slightly different from the species of human beings on Mars. But what would you do there? How would you live? It's going to be the same as it is on Earth. Somebody's going to start a restaurant. Somebody's going to build an iron foundry. Someone will make documentary movies of Mars and sell them on Earth. Some idiot will start a reality TV show. There will be software companies. There will be hotels. There will be bars. This much is certain. It will be the most disruptive event in our lifetimes, and I think it will be the most inspiring. Ask any 10-year-old girl if she wants to go to Mars. Children who are now in elementary school are going to choose to live there. Remember when we landed humans on the moon? When that happened, people looked at each other and said, if we can do this, we can do anything. What are they going to think when we actually form a colony on Mars? Most importantly, it will make us a spacefaring species. And that means humans will survive no matter what happens on Earth. We will never be the last of our kind. Thank you.
That was Stephen Petranek talking about Mars. Next up, here's synthetic biologist Lisa Knipp at her TEDx Beacon Street 2015 talk, How Humans Could Evolve to Survive in Space, Exploring Our Future Bodies Among the Stars.
So there are lands few and far between on Earth itself that are hospitable to humans by any measure. But survive we have. Our primitive ancestors, when they found their homes and livelihood endangered, they dared to make their way into unfamiliar territories in search of better opportunities. And as the descendants of these explorers, we have their nomadic blood coursing through our own veins. But at the same time, distracted by our bread and circuses and embroiled in the wars that we have waged on each other, it seems that we have forgotten this desire to explore. We, as a species, were evolved uniquely for Earth, on Earth, and by Earth. And so content are we with our living conditions that we have grown complacent and just too busy to notice that its resources are finite, and that our sun's life is also finite. While Mars and all the movies made in its name have reinvigorated the ethos for space travel, few of us seem to truly realize that our species' fragile constitution is woefully unprepared for long-duration journeys into space. Let us take a trek to your local national forest for a quick reality check. So just a quick show of hands here. How many of you think you would be able to survive in this lush wilderness for a few days? Well, that's a lot of you. How about a few weeks? That's a decent amount. How about a few months? That's pretty good too. So now let us imagine that this local national forest experiences an eternal winter. Same questions. How many of you think you would be able to survive for a few days? That's quite a lot. Now, how about a few weeks? So for a fun twist, let us imagine that the only source of water available is trapped as frozen blocks, miles below the surface. Soil nutrients are so minimal that no vegetation can be found. And, of course, hardly any atmosphere exists to speak of. Such examples are only a few of the many challenges we would face on a planet like Mars. So how do we steel ourselves for voyages whose destinations are so far removed from a tropical vacation? Will we continuously ship supplies from planet Earth? Build space elevators or impossible miles of transport belts that tether your planet of choice to our home planet? And how do we grow things like food that grew up on Earth, like us? But I'm getting ahead of myself. In our species' journey to find a new home under a new sun, we are, more likely than not, going to be spending much time in the journey itself. In space, on a ship, a hermetic flying can, possibly for many generations. The longest continuous amount of time that any human has spent in space is in the vicinity of 12 to 14 months. From astronauts' experiences in space, we know that spending time in a microgravity environment means bone loss, muscle atrophy, cardiovascular problems, among many other complications that range from the physiological to the psychological. And what about macrogravity, or any other variation in gravitational pull of the planet that we find ourselves on? In short, our cosmic voyages will be fraught with dangers both known and unknown. So far, we've been looking to this new piece of mechanical technology or that great next generation robot as part of a lineup to ensure our species' safe passage in space. Wonderful as they are, I believe the time has come for us to complement these bulky electronic giants with what nature has already invented: the microbe. A single-celled organism that is itself a self-generating, self-replenishing, living machine. It requires fairly little to maintain, offers much flexibility in design, and only asks to be carried in a single plastic tube. The field of study that has enabled us to utilize the capabilities of the microbe is known as synthetic biology. It comes from molecular biology, which has given us antibiotics, vaccines, and better ways to observe the physiological nuances of the human body. Using the tools of synthetic biology, we can now edit the genes of nearly any organism, microscopic or not, with incredible speed and fidelity. Given the limitations of our man-made machines, synthetic biology will be a means for us to engineer not only our food, our fuel, and our environment, but also ourselves to compensate for our physical inadequacies and to ensure our survival in space. To give you an example of how we can use synthetic biology for space exploration, let us return to the Mars environment. The Martian soil composition is similar to that of Hawaiian volcanic ash, with trace amounts of organic material. Let's say, hypothetically, what if Martian soil could actually support plant growth without using Earth-derived nutrients? The first question we should probably ask is, how would we make our plants cold tolerant? Because on average, the temperature on Mars is a very uninviting negative 60 degrees centigrade. The next question we should ask is, how do we make our plants drought tolerant? Considering that most of the water that forms as frost evaporates more quickly than I can say the word evaporate. Well, it turns out we've already done things like this. By borrowing genes for antifreeze protein from fish and genes for drought tolerance from other plants like rice, and then stitching them into the plants that need them, we now have plants that can tolerate most droughts and freezes. They're known on Earth as GMOs, or genetically modified organisms, and we rely on them to feed all the mouths of human civilization. Nature does stuff like this already, without our help. We have simply found more precise ways to do it. So why would we want to change the genetic makeup of plants for space? Well, to not do so would mean needing to engineer endless acres of land on an entirely new planet by releasing trillions of gallons of atmospheric gases and then constructing a giant glass dome to contain it all. It's an unrealistic engineering enterprise that quickly becomes a high-cost cargo transport mission. One of the best ways to ensure that we will have the food supplies and the air that we need is to bring with us organisms that have been engineered to adapt to new and harsh environments. In essence, using engineered organisms to help us terraform a planet both in the short and long term. These organisms can then also be engineered to make medicine or fuel. So we can use synthetic biology to bring highly engineered plants with us, but what else can we do? Well, I mentioned earlier that we as a species were evolved uniquely for planet Earth. That fact has not changed much in the last 5 minutes that you were sitting here and I was standing there. And so if we were to dump any of us on Mars right this minute, even given ample food, water, air, and a suit, we are likely to experience very unpleasant health problems from the amount of ionizing radiation that bombards the surface of planets like Mars that have little or non-existent atmosphere. Unless we plan to stay holed up underground for the duration of our stay on every new planet, we must find better ways of protecting ourselves without needing to resort to wearing a suit of armor that weighs something equal to your own body weight, or needing to hide behind a wall of lead. So let us appeal to nature for inspiration. Among the plethora of life here on Earth, there's a subset of organisms known as extremophiles, or lovers of extreme living conditions, if you'll remember from high school biology. And among these organisms is a bacterium by the name of Deinococcus radiodurans. It is known to be able to withstand cold, dehydration, vacuum, acid, and most notably, radiation. While its radiation tolerance mechanisms are known, we have yet to adapt the relevant genes to mammals. To do so is not particularly easy. There are many facets that go into its radiation tolerance, and it's not as simple as transferring one gene. But given a little bit of human ingenuity and a little bit of time, I think to do so is not very hard either. Even if we borrow just a fraction of its ability to tolerate radiation, it would be infinitely better than what we already have, which is just the melanin in our skin. Using the tools of synthetic biology, we can harness Deinococcus radiodurans' ability to thrive under otherwise very lethal doses of radiation. As difficult as it is to see, Homo sapiens, that is humans, evolves every day and still continues to evolve. Thousands of years of human evolution has not only given us humans like Tibetans who can thrive in low oxygen conditions, but also Argentinians who can ingest and metabolize arsenic, the chemical element that can kill the average human being. Every day, the human body evolves by accidental mutations that equally accidentally allow certain humans to persevere in dismal situations. But, and this is a big but, such evolution requires two things that we may not always have or be able to afford, and they are death and time. In our species' struggle to find our place in the universe, we may not always have the time necessary for the natural evolution of extra functions for survival on non-Earth planets. We're living in what E.O. Wilson has termed the age of gene circumvention, during which we remedy our genetic defects like cystic fibrosis or muscular dystrophy with temporary external supplements. But with every passing day, we approach the age of volitional evolution, a time during which we as a species will have the capacity to decide for ourselves our own genetic destiny. Augmenting the human body with new abilities is no longer a question of how, but of when. Using synthetic biology to change the genetic makeup of any living organisms, especially our own, is not without its moral and ethical quandaries. Will engineering ourselves make us less human? But then again, what is humanity but star stuff that happens to be conscious? where should human genius direct itself? Surely it is a bit of a waste to simply sit back and marvel at it. How do we use our knowledge to protect ourselves from the external dangers, and then protect ourselves from ourselves? I pose these questions not to engender the fear of science, but to bring to light the many possibilities that science has afforded and continues to afford us. We must coalesce as humans to discuss and embrace the solutions, not only with caution, but also with courage. Mars is a destination, but it will not be our last. Our true final frontier is the line we must cross in deciding what we can and should make of our species' improbable intelligence. Space is cold, brutal, and unforgiving. Our path to the stars will be rife with trials that will bring us to question not only who we are, but where we will be going. The answers will lie in our choice to use or abandon the technology that we have gleaned from life itself, and it will define us for the remainder of our term in this universe. Thank you.
Lisa Knipp challenges our biology. Now Michael Schellenberger challenges our energy. In his 2016 TED Talk, How Fear of Nuclear Power is Hurting the Environment, he makes the case for rethinking renewables.
Have you heard the news? We're in a clean energy revolution. Where I live in Berkeley, California, it seems like every day I see a new roof with new solar panels going up, electric car in the driveway. Germany sometimes gets half its power from solar, and India is now committed to building 10 times more solar than we have in California by the year 2022. I mean, even nuclear seems to be making a comeback. Bill Gates is in China working with engineers. There's 40 different companies that are working together to try to race to build the first reactor that runs on waste, that can't melt down, and is cheaper than coal. And so you might start to ask, is this whole global warming problem going to be a lot easier to solve than anybody imagined? That was the question we wanted to know, and so my colleagues and I decided to take a deep dive into the data. We were a little skeptical of some parts of the clean energy revolution story, but what we found really surprised us. So the first thing is that clean energy has been increasing. This is electricity from clean energy sources over the last 20 years. But when you look at the percentage of global electricity from clean energy sources, it's actually been in decline from 36% to 31%. And if you care about climate change, you got to go in the opposite direction to 100% of our electricity from clean energy sources as quickly as possible. Now, you might wonder, come on, how much could 5 percentage points of global electricity be? Well, it turns out to be quite a bit. It's the equivalent of 60 nuclear plants the size of Diablo Canyon, California's last nuclear plant, or 900 solar farms the size of Topaz, which is one of the biggest solar farms in the world and certainly our biggest in California. Well, a big part of this is just simply that fossil fuels are increasing faster than clean energy. And that's understandable. There's just a lot of poor countries that are still using wood and dung and charcoal as their main source of energy, and they need modern fuels. But there's something else going on, which is that one of those clean energy sources in particular has actually been on the decline in absolute terms, not just relatively, and that's nuclear. You can see its generation has declined 7% over the last 10 years. Now, solar and wind have been making huge strides, and so you hear a lot of talk about how it doesn't really matter because solar and wind is going to make up the difference. But the data says something different. When you combine all the electricity from solar and wind, you see it actually barely makes up half of the decline from nuclear. Well, let's take a closer look in the United States. Over the last couple of years, really 2013, 2014, we prematurely retired 4 nuclear power plants. They were almost entirely replaced with fossil fuels. And so the consequence was that we wiped out almost as much clean energy electricity that we get from solar. And it's not unique to us. I mean, people think of California as a clean energy and climate leader, but when we looked at the data, what we found is that, in fact, California reduced emissions more slowly than the national average between 2000 and 2015. What about Germany? they're doing a lot of clean energy. But when you look at the data, German emissions have actually been going up since 2009, and there's really not anybody who's going to tell you that they're going to meet their climate commitments in 2020. The reason isn't hard to understand. Solar and wind provide power about 10 to 20% of the time, which means that when the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, you still need power for your hospitals, your homes, your cities, your factories. And while batteries have made some really cool improvements lately, the truth is that they're just never going to be as efficient as the electrical grid. Every time you put electricity into a battery and you take it out, you lose about 20 to 40% of the power. That's why when in California we try to deal with all the solar we've brought online, we now get about 10% of our electricity from solar. When the sun goes down and people come home from work and turn on their air conditioners and their TV sets and every other appliance in the house, we need a lot of natural gas backup. So what we've been doing is stuffing a lot of natural gas into the side of a mountain. And that worked pretty well for a while, but then late last year it sprung a leak. This is Aliso Canyon, and so much methane gas was released, it was the equivalent of putting 500,000 cars on the road. It basically blew through all of our climate commitments for the year. Well, what about India? Sometimes you have to go places to really get the right data. So we traveled to India a few months ago. We met with all the top officials, solar, nuclear, the rest. And what they told us is they said, we're actually having more serious problems than both Germany and California. We don't have backup. We don't have all the natural gas. And that's just the start of it. We say we want to get to 100 gigawatts by 2022, but last year we did just 5, and the year before that we did 5. So let's just take a closer look at nuclear. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has looked at the carbon content of all these different fuels, and nuclear comes out really low. It's actually lower even than solar. And nuclear obviously provides a lot of power. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. During a year, a single plant can provide power 92% of the time. And what's interesting is that when you look at countries that have deployed different kinds of clean energies, there's only a few that have done so at a pace consistent with dealing with the climate crisis. So nuclear seems like a pretty good option, but there's this big problem with it, which all of you, I'm sure, are aware of, which is that people really don't like it. There was a study, a survey done of people around the world, not just in the United States or Europe, about a year and a half ago, and what they found is that nuclear is actually one of the least popular forms of energy. Even oil is more popular than nuclear. And while nuclear kind of edges out coal, the thing is people don't really fear coal in the same way that they feared nuclear, which really operates on our unconscious. So what is it that we fear? I mean, there's really 3 things. There's the safety of the plants themselves, the fears that they're going to melt down and cause damage. There's the waste from them. And then there's the association with weapons. And I think, understandably, engineers look at those concerns and they want to look for technological fixes. I mean, that's why Bill Gates is in China developing advanced reactors. That's why 40 different entrepreneurs are working on this problem. And I myself have been very excited about it. We did a report, How to Make Nuclear Cheap. In particular, the thorium reactor shows a lot of promise. And so when the climate scientist James Hansen asked if I wanted to go to China with him and look at the Chinese advanced nuclear program, I jumped at the chance. We were there with MIT and UC Berkeley engineers. And I had in my mind that the Chinese would be able to do with nuclear what they did with so many other things. Just start to crank out small nuclear reactors on assembly lines. You could ship them up like iPhones or MacBooks and send them around the world. I would get one home in Berkeley. But what I found was somewhat different. The presentations were all very exciting and very promising. They have multiple reactors that they're working on. The time came for the thorium reactor, and a bunch of us were excited. They went through the whole presentation. They got to the timeline, and they said, we're going to have a thorium molten salt reactor ready for sale to the world by 2040. And I was like, what? Looked at my colleagues. I was like, excuse me, can you guys speed that up a little bit? Because we're in a little bit of a climate crisis right now, and your cities are really polluted, by the way. And they kind of responded back. They were like, I'm not sure what you've heard about our thorium program, but we don't have a third of our budget, and your Department of Energy hasn't been particularly forthcoming with all that data you guys have on testing reactors. And I said, well, I've got an idea. You know how you got 10 years where you're demonstrating that reactor? Let's just skip that part. and let's just go right to commercializing it. That'll save money and time. And the engineer just looked at me and he said, let me ask you a question. Would you buy a car that had never been demonstrated before? So what about the other reactors? There's a reactor that's coming online now. They're starting to sell it. It's a high-temperature gas reactor. It can't melt down, but it's really big and bulky. That's part of the safety, and nobody thinks it's going to ever get cheaper than the reactors that we have. The ones that use waste as fuel are really cool ideas, but the truth is we don't actually know how to do that yet. There's some risk that you actually will make more waste, and most people think that if you're including that waste part of the process, it's just going to make the whole machine a lot more expensive. It's just adding another complicated step. And the truth is that there's real questions about how much of that we're going to do. I mean, we went to India and asked about the nuclear program. The government said before Paris climate talks that they were going to do something like 30 new nuclear plants. But when we got there and we interviewed people and we even looked at the internal documents, they're now saying they're going to do about 5. And in most of the world, especially the rich world, they're not talking about building new reactors. We're actually talking about taking reactors down before their lifetimes are over. Germany's actually pressuring its neighbors to do that. I mentioned the United States. We could lose half of our reactors over the next 15 years, which would wipe out 40% of the emissions reductions we're supposed to get under the Clean Power Plan. And of course, in Japan, they took all their nuclear plants offline, replaced them with coal, natural gas, oil burning, and they're only expected to bring online about 1/3 to 2/3. So when we kind of went through the numbers and just added that up, how much nuclear do we see China and India bringing online over the next 15 years? How much do we see at risk of being taken offline? This was the most startling finding. What we found is that the world is actually at risk of losing 4 times more clean energy than we lost over the last 10 years. In other words, we're not in a clean energy revolution, we're in a clean energy crisis. So it's understandable that engineers would look for a technical fix to the fears that people have of nuclear. But when you consider that these are big challenges to do, that they're going to take a long time to solve, there's this other issue, which is that are those technical fixes really going to solve people's fears? Let's take safety. You know, despite what people think, it's hard to figure out how to make nuclear power much safer. I mean, every medical journal that looks at it, this is the most recent study from the British journal Lancet, one of the most respected journals in the world, nuclear is the safest way to make reliable power. Everybody's scared of the accident. So you go look at the accident data, Fukushima, Chernobyl, World Health Organization finds the same thing. The vast majority of harm is caused by people panicking, and they're panicking because they're afraid. In other words, the harm that's caused isn't actually caused by the machines or the radiation. It's caused by our fears. And what about the waste? Everyone worries about the waste. Well, the interesting thing about the waste is how little of it there is. This is just from one plant. If you take all the nuclear waste we've ever made in the United States, put it on a football field, stacked it up, it would only reach 20 feet high. And people say it is poisoning people or doing something. It's not. It's just sitting there. It's just being monitored. There's not very much of it. By contrast, the waste that we don't control from energy production, we call it pollution, and it kills 7 million people a year, and it's threatening very serious levels of global warming. And the truth is that even if we get good at using that waste as fuel, there's always going to be some fuel left over, and that means there's always going to be those people that think it's a big problem for reasons that maybe don't have as much to do with the actual waste as we think. Well, what about the weapons? Maybe the most surprising thing is that we can't find any examples of countries that have nuclear power and then, decide to go get a weapon. In fact, it works the opposite. What we find is that the only way we know how to get rid of large numbers of nuclear weapons is by using the plutonium in the warheads as fuel in our nuclear power plants. And so if you are wanting to get the world rid of nuclear weapons, then we're going to need a lot more nuclear power. As I was leaving China, the engineer that brought Bill Gates there kind of pulled me aside and he said, Michael, I appreciate your interest in all the different nuclear supply technologies, but there's this more basic issue, which is that there's just not enough global demand. I mean, we can crank out these machines on assembly lines. We do know how to make things cheap, but there's just not enough people that want them. And so let's do solar and wind and efficiency and conservation. Let's accelerate the advanced nuclear programs. I think we should triple the amount of money we're spending on it. But I just think the most important thing, if we're going to overcome the climate crisis, is to keep in mind that the cause of the clean energy crisis isn't from within our machines. It's from within ourselves. Thank you very much. Thank you.
From environmental systems to planetary systems, here's Nagin Cox, NASA engineer with What Time Is It on Mars? Recorded at TEDx Beacon Street 2016, about syncing our clocks with Martian days.
So many of you have probably seen the movie The Martian. But for those of you who did not, it's a movie about an astronaut who is stranded on Mars and his efforts to stay alive until the Earth can send a rescue mission to bring him back to Earth. Gladly, they do reestablish communication with the character astronaut Watney at some point so that he's not as alone on Mars until he can be rescued. So while you're watching the movie, or even if you haven't, when you think about Mars, you're probably thinking about how far away it is and how distant. And what might not have occurred to you is, what are the logistics really like of working on another planet, of living on two planets, when there are people on the Earth and there are rovers or people on Mars? So think about when you have friends, families, and coworkers in California, on the West Coast, or in other parts of the world. When you're trying to communicate with them, one of the things you probably first think about is, wait, what time is it in California? Will I wake them up? Is it okay to call? So even if you're interacting with colleagues who are in Europe, you're immediately thinking about, what does it take to coordinate communication when people are far away? So we don't have people on Mars right now, but we do have rovers. And actually right now on Curiosity, it is 6:10 in the morning. So 6:10 in the morning on Mars. We have 4 rovers on Mars. The United States has put 4 rovers on Mars since the mid-1990s, and I have been privileged enough to work on 3 of them. So I am a spacecraft engineer, spacecraft operations engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Los Angeles, California. And these rovers are our robotic emissaries. So they are our eyes and our ears, and they see the planet for us until we can send people. So we learn how to operate on other planets through these rovers. So before we send people, we send robots. So the reason there's a time difference on Mars right now from the time that we're at is because the Martian day is longer than the Earth day. So our Earth day is 24 hours because that's how long it takes the Earth to rotate, how long it takes to go around once, so our day is 24 hours. It takes Mars 24 hours and approximately 40 minutes to rotate once. So that means that the Martian day is 40 minutes longer than the Earth day. So teams of people who are operating the rovers on Mars, like this one, what we are doing is we are living on Earth but working on Mars. So we have to think as if we are actually on Mars with the rover. Our job, the job of this team, of which I'm a part of, is to send commands to the rover to tell it what to do the next day, to tell it to drive or drill or tell her whatever she's supposed to do. So while she's sleeping, and the rover does sleep at night because she needs to recharge her batteries and she needs to weather the cold Martian night, and so she sleeps. So while she sleeps, we work on her program for the next day. So I work the Martian night shift. So in order to come to work on the Earth at the same time every day on Mars, like let's say I need to be at work at 5 p.m., this team needs to be at work at 5 p.m. Mars time every day, then we have to come into work on the Earth 40 minutes later every day. in order to stay in sync with Mars. So that's like moving a time zone every day, right? So one day you come in at 8, the next day 40 minutes later at 8:40, the next day 40 minutes later at 9:20, the next day at 10. So you keep moving 40 minutes every day until soon you're coming to work in the middle of the night, the middle of the Earth night, right? So you can imagine how confusing that is. Hence, the Mars watch. This watch has been the weights have been mechanically adjusted so that it runs more slowly, right? And we didn't start out, I got this watch in 2004 when Spirit and Opportunity, the rovers back then, we didn't start out thinking that we were going to need Mars watches, right? We thought, okay, we'll just have the time on our computers and on the mission control screens, and that would be enough. Yeah, not so much. Because we weren't just working on Mars time, we were actually living on Mars time. And we got just instantaneously confused about what time it was. So you really needed something on your wrist to tell you, so you could, like, okay, what time is it on the Earth? What time is it on Mars? And it wasn't just the time on Mars that was confusing. We also needed to be able to talk to each other about it. So a sol is a Martian day, again, 24 hours and 40 minutes. So when we're talking about something that's happening on the Earth, we will say today. So for Mars, we say to sol, right? Yesterday became yestersol for Mars. Again, we didn't start out thinking, oh, let's invent a language. It was just very confusing. I remember somebody walked up to me and said, I would like to do this activity on the vehicle tomorrow, on the rover. And I said, tomorrow, or Mars tomorrow, right? We started this terminology because we needed a way to talk to each other. So tomorrow became nextersol or solaro. Right? Because people have different preferences for the words they use, right? Some of you might say soda, and some of you might say pop. So we have people who say nextersol or solaro. And then something that I noticed after a few years of working on these missions was that the people who work on the rovers, we say to sol. The people who work on the landed missions that don't rove around, they say to sol. So I could actually tell what mission you worked on from your Martian accent. So we have the watches and the language, and you're detecting a theme here, right? So that we don't get confused. But even the Earth daylight could confuse us. If you think that right now you've come to work and it's the middle of the Martian night and there's light streaming in from the windows, that's going to be confusing as well. So you can see from this image of the control room that all of the blinds are down so that there is no light to distract us. The blinds went down all over the building about a week before landing, and then they didn't go up till we went off Mars time. So this also works for the house, right, for at home. So I've been on Mars time 3 times, and my husband is like, okay, we're getting ready for Mars time. And so he'll put foil all over the windows, and we darken, dark curtains and shades, because it also affects your families. And here I was living in kind of this darkened environment, but so was he. And he'd gotten used to it. But then I would get these plaintive emails from him when he was at work. Should I come home? Are you awake? What time is it on Mars? And I said, okay, so he needs a Mars watch. But of course, it's 2016, so there's an app for that. So now we do, instead of the watches, we can also use our phones. But the impact on families was just across the board. It wasn't just those of us who were working on the rovers, but our families as well. This is David O, one of our flight directors, and he's at the beach in Los Angeles with his family at 1 a.m. So because we landed in August and his kids didn't have to go back to school until September, they actually went on to Mars time with him for 1 month. They got up 40 minutes later every day. And they were on Dad's work schedule, so they lived on Mars time for a month and had these great adventures like going bowling in the middle of the night or going to the beach. And one of the things that we all discovered is you can get anywhere in Los Angeles at 3 in the morning when there's no traffic. So we would get off work and instead of going to, we didn't want to go home and bother our families, and we were hungry, so instead of going, locally to eat something, we'd go, wait, there's this great all-night deli in Long Beach, and we can get there in like 10 minutes. So we would drive down, it was like the 60s, right? No traffic. We would drive down there, and the restaurant owners would go, who are you people? And why are you at my restaurant at 3 in the morning? So they came to realize that there were these packs of Martians roaming the LA freeways in the middle of the night. And in the middle of the Earth night. And we did actually start calling ourselves Martians. And so those of us who were on Mars time, we would refer to ourselves as Martians and everyone else as Earthlings. And that's because when you're moving a time zone every day, you start to really feel separated from everyone else. You're literally in your own world. So I have this button on that says, I survived Mars time. Saw 0 to 90, and there's a picture of it up on the screen. So the reason we got these buttons is because we work on Mars time in order to be as efficient as possible with the rover on Mars, to make the best use of our time. But we don't stay on Mars time for more than 3 to 4 months. Eventually, we'll move to a modified Mars time, which is what we're working now. And that's because it's hard on your bodies, it's hard on your families. In fact, there were sleep researchers who actually were studying us because it was so unusual for humans to try to extend their day. And they had about 30 of us that they would do sleep deprivation experiments on us. And so I would come in and take the test, and I fell asleep in each one. And that was because, again, this was so, eventually it becomes as hard on your body, even though it was a blast. Right? It was a huge bonding experience with the other members on the team, but it is difficult to sustain. So these rover missions are our first steps out into the solar system. We are learning how to live on more than one planet. We are changing our perspective to become multiplanetary. So the next time you see a Star Wars movie and there are people going from the Dagobah system to Tatooine, think about what it really means to have people spread out so far. What it means in terms of the distances between them, how they will start to feel separate from each other, and just the logistics of the time. We have not sent people to Mars yet, but we hope to. And between companies like SpaceX and NASA and all of the international space agencies of the world, we hope to do that in the next few decades. So soon we will have people on Mars, and we truly will be multiplanetary. And the young boy or the young girl who are the people who will be going to Mars could be in this audience or listening today. I have wanted to work at JPL on these missions since I was 14 years old, and I am privileged to be a part of it. And this is a remarkable time in the space program, and we are all in this journey together. So the next time you think you don't have enough time in your day, just remember it's all a matter of your earthly perspective. Thank you.
That was Mars Time. Coming next, Xavier de Castellier. Hope I pronounced that right, Xavier. From TEDx ESA 2016. Exploring architecture off-world, designing habitats beyond Earth.
I must have been about 12 years old when my dad took me to an exhibition on space, not far from here in Brussels. And the year was about, I think it was 1988, so it was the end of the Cold War. There was a bit of an upmanship going on between the Americans and the Russians, bringing bits to that exhibition. NASA brought a big blow-up space shuttle. But the Russians, they brought a Mir space station. It was actually the training module. And you could go inside and check it all out. It was the real thing, where the buttons were, where the wires were, where the astronauts were eating, where they were working. And when I came home, first thing I did, I started drawing spaceships. Now, these weren't science fiction spaceships, no. They were actually technical drawings. They were sections, cutaway sections of what kind of structure it would be made out of, where the wires were, where the screws were. So, unfortunately, I didn't become a space engineer, but I did become an architect. These are some of the projects I've been involved with over the last decade and a half. All these projects are quite different shapes, and it is because they're built in different environments. They have different constraints. And I think design becomes really interesting when you get really harsh constraints. Now, these projects have been all over the world. A few years ago, this map wasn't good enough. It was too small. We had to add this one. Because we were going to do a project on the moon for the European Space Agency. They asked us to design a moon habitat and one on Mars with NASA, a competition to look at a habitation on Mars. Whenever you go to another place as an architect and try to design something, you look at the local architecture, the precedents that are there. Now, on the moon, that's kind of difficult, of course, because there's only there's only the Apollo missions. So last time we went there, I wasn't even born yet. And we only spent about 3 days there. So for me, that's kind of a long camping trip, isn't it? But a rather expensive one. Now, the tricky thing when you're going to build on another planet or a moon is how to get it there. So, first of all, to get a kilogram, for example, to a moon surface, it will cost about $200,000. Very expensive. So you want to keep it very light. Second, space. Space is limited. All right, this is an Ariane 5 rocket. The space you have there is about 4.5 meters by 7 meters. Not that much. So it needs to be an architectural system that is both compact or compactable and light. And I think I've got one right here. It's very compact and it's very light. And actually, this is one I made earlier. Now, there's one problem with it, that inflatables are quite fragile. They need to be protected. Specifically when you go to a very harsh environment like the moon. Look at it like this. The temperature difference on a moon base could be anything up to 200 degrees. You could have on one side of the base, it could be 100 degrees Celsius. And on the other side, it could be minus 100 degrees. You need to protect yourself from that. The moon also does not have any magnetic fields, which means that any radiation, solar radiation, cosmic radiation, will hit the surface. We need to protect ourselves from that as well, protect the astronauts from that. And then third, but definitely not last, the moon does not have any atmosphere, which means any meteorites coming into it will not get burned up and they hit the surface. That's why the moon is full of craters. Again, we need to protect the astronauts from that. So what kind of structure do we need? Well, the best thing is really a cave. Because a cave has a lot of mass, and we need mass. We need the mass to protect ourselves from the temperatures, from the radiation, and from the meteorites. So this is how we solved it. We having the blue part, as you can see, that's an inflatable for a moon base. It gives a lot of living space and a lot of lab space. And attached to it, you have a cylinder. And that has all the support structures in, all the life support, and also the airlock. And on top of that, we have a structure, that dome structure, that protects ourselves. Has a lot of mass in it. Where are we going to get this material from? Are we going to bring concrete and cement from Earth to the moon? Well, of course not, because it's way too heavy. It's too expensive. So we're going to go and use local materials. Now, local materials is something we do on Earth as well. Wherever we build, or whatever country we build, we always look at what are the local materials here. Problem with the moon is, what are the local materials? Well, there's not that many. Well, actually, we have one. It's moon dust. Or, fancier scientific name, regolith, moon regolith. Great thing is, it's everywhere, right? The surface is covered with it. It's about 20 centimeters up to a few meters everywhere. But how are we going to build with it? Well, we're going to use a 3D printer. Whenever I ask any of you what are 3D printers, you probably are thinking, well, probably something about this size, and it will print things that are about this size. So of course I'm not going to bring a massive 3D printer to the moon to print my moon base. I'm going to use a much smaller device, something like this one here. So this is a small device, a small robot rover that has a little scoop, and it brings the regolith to the dome, and then it lays down a thin layer of regolith. And then you will have the robot that will solidify it layer by layer until it creates, after a few months, the full base. You might have noticed that there's quite a particular structure that we're printing. And I've got a little example here. What we call this is a closed cell foam structure. Looks quite natural. The reason why we're using this as part of that shell structure is that we only need to solidify certain parts, which means we have to bring less binder from Earth, and it becomes much lighter. Now, that approach of designing something and then covering it with a protective dome, we also did for our Mars project. You can see it here. 3 domes, and you see the printers printing these dome structures. There is a big difference between Mars and Moon, and let me explain it. This diagram shows you, to scale, the size of Earth and the Moon and the real distance, about 400,000 kilometers. If we then go to Mars, the distance from Mars to Earth, and this picture here is taken by the rover on Mars, Curiosity, looking back at Earth. You kind of see the little speckle there, that's Earth, 400 million kilometers away. The problem with that distance is that it's 1,000 times the distance Earth-Moon, really far away, but there's no direct radio contact with, for example, the Curiosity rover. So I cannot teleoperate it from Earth. I can't say, oh, Mars rover, go left, because that signal would take 20 minutes to get to Mars. And then the rover might go left, and then it'll take another 20 minutes before it can tell me, oh yeah, I went left. So, the distance. So stuff, rovers and robots are going to have to work autonomously. The other issue with it is that missions to Mars are highly risky. We've only seen it a few weeks ago. So what if half of the mission doesn't arrive at Mars? What do we do? Well, instead of building just 1 or 2 rovers that we did on the Moon, we're going to build hundreds of them. And it's a bit like a termite mound, you know? Termites, I would take half of the colony of the termites away, they would still be able to build the mound. It might take a little bit longer. Same here. If half of our rovers or robots don't arrive, well, it will take a bit longer, but we'll still be able to do it. So here we even have 3 different rovers. In the back, you see the digger. It's really good at digging regolith. Then we have the transporter, great at taking regolith and bringing it to the structure. And the last ones, the little ones with the little legs, they don't need to move a lot. What they do is they go and sit on a layer of regolith and then microwave it together. And layer by layer, create that dome structure. Now, we also want to try that out. So we went out on a workshop and we created our own swarm of robots. Here we go. So we built 10 of those. It's a small swarm. And we took 6 tons of sand. And we tried out how these little robots would actually be able to move sand around. Earth sand, in this case. And they were not teleoperated, right? Nobody was telling them, go left, go right, or giving them a pre-described path. No. They were given a task. Move sand from this area to that area. And if they came across an obstacle, like a rock, they had to sort itself out themselves. Or they came across another robot, they had to be able to make decisions. Or even if half of them fell out, the batteries died, they still had to be able to finish that task. Now, I talked about redundancy. But that was not only with the robots, it was also with the habitats. On the Mars project, we decided to do 3 domes. Because if one didn't arrive, the other 2 could still form a base. And that was mainly because each of the domes have a life support system built in the floor, so they can work independently. So, in a way, you might think, well, this is pretty crazy. Why would you, as an architect, get involved in space? Because it's such a technical field. Well, I'm actually really convinced that with a creative view, with a design view, you are able to solve really hard and really constrained problems. And I really feel that there is a place for design and architecture in projects like interplanetary habitation. Thank you.
You've journeyed through planets, minds, genetics, energy, and architecture, all under the Science Block banner. This is Public Knowledge Radio. Stay tuned for more.